The air in the grand proscenium hall of the Xylos Interstellar Academy was a carefully calibrated miracle. It held the precise humidity for the gill breathers of Cygnus X1, the exact nitrogen content for the silicon-based glyptodonians, and a dozen other trace elements for the myriad other species that filled the tiered, floating seeding discs. For Lyra, a Cathar from a world of gentle breezes and sprawling grasslands, it always felt sterile and thin. She adjusted the fine, downy fur on her forelimbs, a nervous habit, and tried to focus on the lecturer, a shimmering, crystalline entity whose words manifested as harmonic light pulses. It wasn't the air that was truly bothering her. It was the presence seated 2 tiers below and to her left. A human. His name was Ben Carter, and he was doing nothing overtly threatening. He was slumped slightly in his seat, his bipedal form relaxed, one of his strange, 5-fingered hands occasionally rising to scratch the back of his neck. He looked soft. His species lacked any obvious natural armor, no chitinous plates, no hardened hide. They had no claws, no fangs to speak of. Yet every time he shifted his weight, Lyra's 3 hearts gave a painful, asynchronous lurch. Her large, liquid black eyes, set on the sides of her head to give her a near-panoramic view of her surroundings, kept flicking towards him. It was an involuntary, deeply ingrained reflex she had been fighting since the human exchange students first arrived. The sight of his face, with both eyes fixed forward in a flat plane, sent a cold spike of dread through her delicate frame. It was a configuration she knew from the deepest, oldest parts of her mind. A pattern screamed in the genetic memory of her ancestors. It was the facial structure of a killer. On her homeworld, Cathar, every creature with forward-facing eyes was a predator. The slinking, 6-legged voral cats that hunted in the tall grasses, the diving skyshrikes that could spot a trembling Cathar fawn from a kilometer in the air. They all shared that trait. It was the biological signifier of a creature that did not need to watch its back, a creature that pursued. Lyra's fur, which normally shone a placid sky blue, was now dusted with flecks of anxious gray. Her scent glands, tucked beneath her 2 primary manipulator limbs, were threatening to release the acrid pheromone of distress. She clenched them shut, a feat of muscle control learned in childhood to avoid starting a herd-wide panic. She was at the most prestigious institution in the known galaxy, a place of intellect and enlightenment. Panic was unbecoming, and yet it was there, a low, constant hum beneath her consciousness. It was a feeling of being watched, even when the human was looking away. It was the unnerving sense of being sized up, evaluated not for her intellect, but for her mass, for the sinew and bone beneath her soft fur. She felt like prey. She wasn't alone. 2 rows over, a gelatinous Peathlopian student had subtly densified its body, a defensive measure. Even Unit 734, a glyptodonian whose consciousness was a network of light within a slow-moving crystalline body, seemed to orient its multifaceted surface slightly away from the human contingent, a statistical anomaly in its usually perfect, energy-efficient posture. The lecture ended with a final, resonant chime of light. Students began to rise, their various forms of locomotion carrying them towards the exits. Lyra gathered her datapad with her upper limbs, her 4 lower legs feeling unsteady. She needed to get to the Arboretum, a quiet dome that replicated Cathar's environment to soothe her frayed nerves. Such a waste of processing power, a sharp, clicking voice said beside her. Lyra turned to see Xyler, a Vexian, standing over her. His multifaceted eyes, 100 tiny lenses, took in her trembling limbs and the disarray of her fur. His own body was a marvel of predatory efficiency, a sleek, dark green exoskeleton, razor-sharp mandibles that clicked when he spoke, and a posture of absolute, arrogant stillness. The Vexians were hunters, but of a different sort. They were ambush predators, territorial and solitary, preying on small, witless ground crawlers on their jungle world. They were not apex. There were things that hunted the Vexians. "I do not understand your meaning, Xyler," Lyra chirped, her voice thin. "Your condition," Xyler clicked, gesturing dismissively with a scythed forelimb in the direction of the departing humans. "This widespread, illogical fear, it is an evolutionary dead end. You Cathar are a species of prey animals, and you carry your weakness with you to the stars. It is embarrassing to watch." Lyra flinched. "It is not a choice. It is instinct. Is a tool, not a master," he retorted. My instincts tell me to establish a territory and eliminate competitors. Do you see me attempting to dismember the Dean? No, I have risen above such base impulses. You and the others, you let this phantom terror rule you. The humans are soft, slow, and unfocused. Their senses are dull. I have analyzed their physiology. They are laughable. Xyler's arrogance was as much a part of him as his chitin. He saw the universe as a series of dominance contests, and in his mind he was always the victor. He viewed the Cathar's communal nature and gentle demeanor as profound flaws. They are not weak, Lyra whispered, the words surprising even herself. There is something else. Delusion, Xyler scoffed. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. Watch me. I will prove to you all how baseless this is. I will not scurry away like a frightened grub. I will engage them. I will demonstrate their inferiority for all to see. Then, perhaps, you will learn to control your pathetic trembling. He straightened up and strode away, his gait a perfect, silent glide. Lyra watched him go, a new kind of fear coiling in her gut. It was not the primal dread the humans inspired, but the cold, cognitive fear of watching someone walk, with full confidence, into a predator's den. In the central data spire, a place of absolute silence broken only by the whisper of cooling systems, Unit 734 correlated data. Its crystalline form was connected directly to the spire's main hub via a fiber-optic tendril. Information flowed into its consciousness not as words or images, but as pure, unadulterated data streams. Query. Interspecies physiological stress reactions, non-hostile environment, cross-reference. Species designation, human, cross-reference. Subject species, Cathar, Pethlopian, Glyptodonian, self-analysis, 27 others. The results were illogical. Since the arrival of the 12 human exchange students, records from the Academy's ambient biomonitors showed a statistically significant increase in stress indicators among a specific subset of the student population. Heart rates, adrenaline analogs, pheromonal releases, bioluminescence patterns, all pointed towards a classic fight-or-flight response. Yet, there were 0 recorded instances of human aggression. In fact, the humans' own biosignatures registered consistently in the ranges of calm, curious, or amicable. Unit 734 processed this contradiction. The prevailing theory among the affected students was that it was a subconscious, instinctual reaction. Unit 734's own logic pathways found this explanation unsatisfying. Instinct was a product of evolutionary pressures. An instinct to fear a specific stimulus implied that stimulus was, at some point in the subject's evolutionary history, a legitimate threat. The Glyptodonian race had evolved on a world of slow geological processes and rare, seismic threats. Their primary survival trait was patience and data analysis. Their fear was a cold calculation of risk, not a hot-blooded panic. Yet, when the human named Ava Reyes had once stood beside Unit 734 to examine a stellar chart, Unit 734 had felt a surge in its internal temperature, a self-preservation protocol usually reserved for imminent structural collapse. The human had been perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the holographic star map. It was this stillness that Unit 734's analysis kept flagging as the trigger. The absolute focused calm of a creature assessing a target, it accessed the Universal Codex entry for humanity. Designation: sapient mammalian bipedal, homeworld. Earth, a Class M planet with an unusually high biodiversity and a history of mass extinction events. The public-facing data was benign. They were described as adaptable, social, and innovative. There were notes on their primitive but rapid technological development, their art, their philosophies. Nothing justified the terror. Unit 734 initiated a deeper search, slicing past the diplomatic summaries and into the raw data feeds Earth had provided upon joining the galactic community. Planetary biology, evolutionary history, anthropology. It was a chaotic mess of information, much of it contradictory. But patterns began to emerge. Fossil records spoke of a planet where competition was the driving force of evolution. Every niche was filled, every advantage exploited. And humanity's ancestors, they were not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most venomous. For millions of years they were prey. Small, clever primates, hunted by powerful cats, giant birds, and monstrous reptiles. Then something changed. The data became more fragmented. There was a shift in the fossil record. The bones of predators began appearing in hominid campsites, marked with the scrapes of primitive tools. The hominids themselves changed. Their skeletons grew lighter, more suited for long-distance travel. Their brains grew exponentially. Unit 734 paused its analysis, retracting its data tendril. The correlation was still missing. Why would a former prey species inspire such fear in other prey species? It should be the opposite, a sense of camaraderie, of shared history. Yet the instinct screamed otherwise. It was a puzzle, and Unit 734's entire existence was dedicated to solving puzzles. This one, however, felt different. This one felt like reading the preamble to a warning label of galactic importance. Caution, contents under extreme pressure. The opportunity Xyler had been waiting for presented itself in the form of the annual Nexus Combat Simulation Tournament. The Nexus was the pinnacle of strategic study at the Academy, a fully immersive holographic environment where students could lead armies, design ecosystems, or, in its most popular mode, engage in one-on-one tactical combat. The simulation adapted to each species' unique physiology and cognitive processes, making it the ultimate level playing field. Xyler was a master of the Nexus. His Vexian mind, honed for ambush and territorial control, was perfectly suited to its challenges. He dispatched his early opponents with contemptuous ease, his simulated avatar, a larger, more formidable version of himself, moving through the holographic jungles and canyons like a ghost, striking from the shadows and vanishing before a response was possible. He made a point of spectating the human matches. He watched Ava Reyes, the female human who seemed to be a social hub for her kind. She was competent, he had to admit, but her tactics were bafflingly straightforward. There was no subtlety, no cunning misdirection. She simply advanced, her simulated forces moving in relentless, grinding patterns. She won, but it was ugly, brute force work. Or so he thought. He found Lyra and a small group of other anxious students huddled around a public view screen, watching a replay of one of Ava's matches. "You see," Xyler announced, his voice drawing nervous flinches from the group. "There is nothing to fear. Her strategy is linear, predictable. She simply throws mass at her opponent until they break. It is the tactic of a simple mind." "Has not lost a match," Lyra murmured, her eyes wide as she watched Ava's avatar relentlessly pursue a panicked, insected opponent across a digital desert. "Because she has faced only cowards and fools," Xyler sneered. "Her opponents see a human and their primitive instincts override their tactical sense. They panic. They make mistakes. I would not." The human Ava happened to be walking past with her friend Ben at that very moment, fresh from her victory and laughing about something. The sound was loud, uninhibited. She smiled, a wide display of her blunt, white teeth. To Lyra it was a primal threat display, a wolf baring its fangs, her fur prickled with gray. To Xyler it was the final insult. The braying of an inferior species that believed itself to be dominant. He strode forward, blocking their path. The two humans stopped, their smiles fading into expressions of mild surprise. "Human." "Ava Reyes," Xyler said, his mandibles clicking sharply. It was the Vexian equivalent of pointing. Ava's eyebrows, peculiar furry ridges above her eyes, rose slightly. "Yeah. Can I help you? You believe yourself to be a skilled tactician," Xyler stated. It was not a question. "I do okay," Ava said, crossing her arms. A subtle shift in her posture, a squaring of her shoulders. Ben took a half step back, his expression becoming watchful. "Your methods are crude," Xyler continued, his arrogance radiating from him like heat. "You have progressed in this tournament only because you face opponents crippled by their own irrational fears. They defeat themselves before you even engage." Ava's expression didn't change, but something in her forward-facing eyes sharpened. The amiable softness was gone, replaced by a focused, analytical light. "Is that so? I propose a demonstration," Xyler declared, his voice rising so that others in the hall turned to watch. "You and I a formal challenge in the Nexus. I will show these trembling prey things what a true predator's tactics look like. And I will expose the utter simplicity of your own." A hush fell over the gathered students. This was more than a simple challenge. It was a public, species-level insult. Lyra wanted to sink through the floor. Ben looked at Ava. "You don't have to do this, Ava." Ava didn't look at him. Her gaze was locked on Xyler. For a long moment she was completely still. It was a stillness Lyra had seen before in the documentaries of Cathar's predators. The absolute calm before the pounce. Then she smiled again. But this time it was different. It wasn't the wide, friendly baring of teeth from before. This was a smaller, tighter expression, barely an upturning of the lips. It did not reach her eyes. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and ancient. "Fine," Ava said, her voice quiet but carrying across the silent hall. "I accept your challenge. Let's see what a true predator can do." Nexus Arena was packed. Spectator discs filled the air, a silent, multi-species audience ready to witness the confrontation. The main view screen dominated one wall, ready to project a third-person view of the simulation, while smaller screens were slave to each contestant's point of view, including their real-time biometric data and facial expressions. Lyra, Unit 734, and a dozen other students occupied a disc near the front. Lyra's three hearts beat a frantic, terrified rhythm. Xyler entered his simulation pod with a flourish, his posture radiating supreme confidence. His biometric feed showed a state of heightened alertness, his Vexian physiology primed for combat. He was in his element. Ava entered her own pod without ceremony. She stretched her arms over her head, rolled her neck, and sat down. Her biometric feed was astonishingly calm. Her heart rate was slow and steady, lower than her resting rate during a lecture. Her breathing was deep and even. She looked bored. "The environment has been randomly generated," the Nexus Arbiter's voice boomed. "Map designation, primordial swamp. Objectives, eliminate the opponent's avatar. Let the match begin." The main screen flickered to life, showing a dense, misty swampland filled with towering, fungal trees and murky water. Xyler's avatar materialized in a grove of bioluminescent fungi. He immediately dropped into a crouch, his form blending perfectly with the shadows. His POV camera showed him scanning the terrain, his multifaceted eyes cataloging every potential ambush point, every escape route. He was a master of his domain. He began to move, silent and unseen, laying down a series of sophisticated traps, sonic lures, proximity snares, and holographic decoys. His strategy was classic Vexian. Control the territory, force the enemy into a fatal mistake. Ava's avatar materialized on a muddy bank at the edge of a wide, sluggish river. She did nothing. For a full minute, she simply stood there, her avatar's head slowly panning across the landscape. Her real-world face, shown on the side screen, was a mask of placid concentration. Her eyes were slightly unfocused, as if she were looking through the screen, not at it. "What is she doing?" Lyra whispered, her manipulator limbs twisting together. "She is processing." Unit 734 pulsed in reply, its crystalline structure faintly glowing. "But I do not recognize the method. Her neural activity is unusually synchronized." Then Ava moved, but she didn't creep or sneak. She started walking. It was a steady, rhythmic pace directly into the swamp. She wasn't seeking cover. She wasn't trying to be quiet. She was just moving, her path taking her in a wide, sweeping arc around the edge of the map. Xyler, watching from his hiding place, let out a series of triumphant clicks, audible over his calm. "Foolish mammal, she walks into my web." One of his sonic lures activated, mimicking the sound of a small, injured creature. It was a trap designed to draw an incautious predator into a killing zone. Ava didn't even turn her head. She continued her steady, relentless walk, ignoring it completely. She walked right past one of his concealed proximity snares, which failed to trigger. In the control booth, the Nexus Arbiter, a being of pure energy, made a pronouncement. "Challenger Rays has disabled proximity sensors. She is running on passive detection only." Was stunned. She was fighting blind. It made no sense. This wasn't caution, it was idiocy. Frustrated, he abandoned his position and began to shadow her, intending to find the perfect moment for a decisive strike from behind. But he could never quite close the distance. Ava's pace was unnervingly constant. It wasn't fast, but it never wavered. Through thick mud over tangled roots across shallow streams, she just kept going. Xyler, used to short bursts of speed and long periods of stillness, found himself having to work to keep up. A thin sheen of secreted lubricant began to coat his real-world exoskeleton as his body temperature rose. The audience was confused. This wasn't a battle, it was a hike. But Unit 734 was processing frantically. It analyzed Ava's path. It was not random. It was a perfect, geometrically precise spiral slowly tightening towards the center of the map. She wasn't hunting Xyler. She was systematically eliminating the terrain. She was shrinking his world. Xyler finally realized it, too. A spike of alarm shot through him. He had been so focused on her avatar that he hadn't noticed the tactical map. More than half of the swamp was now behind her. He had been unknowingly herded into a smaller and smaller area. The hunter had become the contained. Panic began to fray the edges of his cold, Vexian logic. He abandoned stealth and broke into a sprint, trying to circle around her and regain control of the wider territory. And that was when Ava's strategy changed. Her avatar stopped walking and broke into a run. It wasn't a sprint. It was a steady, loping jog. Her real-world heart rate increased, but only slightly, settling into a new, powerful rhythm. The chase was on. What followed was the most horrifying spectacle Lyra had ever witnessed. Xyler was faster in a short burst. He would sprint, find cover, and try to catch his breath. But seconds later, Ava would appear, still jogging at that same, unhurried, soul-destroying pace. She never lost sight of him. She never tired. The viewscreen split, showing Xyler's frantic, panicked POV next to Ava's calm, steady one. Xyler's view was a blur of shaking foliage and desperate glances over his shoulder. Ava's was rock-steady, her gaze fixed on the fleeing shape of the Vexian. The only thing that changed was that the shape got progressively closer. This is a persistence hunt. Unit 734 pulsed, its light flickering with dawning horror. An ancient predatory strategy from Earth. They did not outrun their prey, they did not overpower it, they simply ran it to exhaustion. The audience finally understood. They weren't watching a tactical simulation. They were watching a genetic memory play out on a holographic stage. This was how humanity had clawed its way to the top of its homeworld's lethal food chain. This was the source of the fear. It was the terror of being relentlessly run down by something that does not stop. Ever. Xyler was breaking. His avatar's movements became clumsy. His real-world biometrics were a chaotic storm of stress signals. He had been running for what felt like an eternity. His powerful Vexian muscles, designed for explosive ambush, were screaming in protest. He made one last, desperate attempt to set an ambush, hiding behind a massive, fungal trunk. He waited, his mandibles chattering with a mixture of fear and rage. There was silence. For a moment he thought he might have lost her. Hope flared. Then Ava's voice came over the calm and conversational. You know, the Tarahumara people on my world can run for over 100 miles without stopping. They used to hunt deer by chasing them for 2 days straight until the animal's heart just gave out. It's all about pacing and heat regulation. Humans are the best endurance runners on our planet. We can sweat. Can you sweat, Xyler? His blood ran cold. She wasn't just chasing him. She was talking to him, taunting him. It was a psychological attack of unimaginable cruelty. He burst from cover, screaming a silent, digital roar, and charged directly at her. It was a move born of pure, distilled panic. Ava's avatar stopped jogging. She planted her feet, lowered her center of gravity, and in a movement too swift for Lyra's eyes to properly track, sidestepped his charge and delivered a single, precise blow to the side of his avatar's leg joint. There was a sickening crack. Xyler's avatar crumpled to the ground, immobilized. The simulation didn't end. Ava's avatar walked over and stood above the fallen Vexian. She didn't strike the final blow. She just stood there, her shadow falling over him, her real-world face still a mask of calm, focused intensity. The silence stretched for an eternity. Finally, Xyler's voice, thin and trembling, came over the calm. I concede. The words match over flashed on the screen. The simulation vanished. In the arena, Xyler's pod opened. The Vexian stumbled out, his proud exoskeleton seeming to shrink in on itself. He leaned against the pod, his limbs trembling violently. He didn't look at the audience. He stared at the floor, his multifaceted eyes vacant with a horror that went beyond mere defeat. He had not just been beaten. He had been defined. His deepest sense of self, his identity as a predator, had been systematically dismantled and exposed as a fragile boast. He had been hunted, and in the final moments he had felt the same mindless terror as the smallest grub on his homeworld, fleeing from his own shadow. Ava's pod opened. She stepped out, rolling her shoulders and taking a deep drink from a water bottle. She looked up at the silent audience, a flicker of confusion on her face. Then she saw Xyler, and her expression softened with what looked like genuine concern. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, taking a step towards him. "It's just a game. I didn't mean to be a jerk with that whole Tarahumara thing. I was just trying to get in your head." Flinched back from her approach as if she were on fire. Every alien in the room flinched with him. They saw her now. They all saw her. The friendly, soft-skinned mammal was gone. In her place stood something else. They saw the bared teeth smile not as a greeting, but as the satisfied expression of a predator whose chase was successful. They saw the forward-facing eyes not as a sign of intellectual focus, but as the unblinking gaze of a killer locking onto its target. They saw her calm demeanor not as peace, but as the terrible, patient stillness of an ambush predator that could outlast the mountains. The fear was no longer a mystery. It had a name, a face, and a history written in the blood and terror of a million-year hunt. The students of the galaxy had come to this place of enlightenment to study the universe. They had not realized that they would be sharing a classroom with its most patient, most relentless, and most terrifying creation. Silence reigned in the viewing hall. It was a heavy, profound silence, thick with dawning comprehension. The match was over, but the revelation was just beginning. Every non-human student stared, not at the broken form of Xyler, but at Ava Reyes. She was talking to Ben now, her voice light, her posture relaxed, laughing as she described Xyler's final, desperate charge. To her, it was a game, a contest of skill she had won. To everyone else, it was a brutal demonstration of evolutionary destiny. The disconnect was the most terrifying part. She was not a monster. She was not malicious. The horror lay in the fact that this predatory nature was so deeply ingrained in her that she was not even consciously aware of its effect. The hunt was as natural to her as breathing. Lyra felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. The frantic, chaotic panic was gone, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. The unknown is always the most frightening. Now the fear had a shape. It had a reason. Her instincts had not been lying, nor had they been irrational. They had been a perfectly logical warning system, screaming a message her conscious mind had refused to hear. Unit 734's internal systems were working at maximum capacity. The match had provided the final, critical data set. It wove together the strands of information, Earth's chaotic, hypercompetitive biosphere, the fossil record of small, vulnerable hominids, the sudden evolutionary leap. And now this innate psychological dominance over other hunters. Analysis complete, it pulsed to itself, the thought resonating through its crystalline lattice. Conclusion: the human species did not evolve to merely survive among predators. They evolved to supplant them. Their primary evolutionary weapon was not fangs or claws, but metabolic endurance and psychological warfare. They are a species that domesticated their own planet's apex predators for companionship, while simultaneously driving a majority of them to extinction through sheer persistence. They are not merely predators. They are a metapredator, a creature that preys on other predators. The implications were staggering. The Galactic Compact was founded on principles of mutual respect and the assumption of rough parity between sapient species. But there was no parity here. Biologically, fundamentally, humans were in a class of their own. The galaxy had invited a shark to a swimming lesson for minnows, and had been surprised when the water felt unsafe. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at the academy changed. It was subtle at first. Alien students began giving humans a wider berth in the corridors. Conversations would hush when a human approached. Seats next to them in lecture halls remained conspicuously empty. The humans, for their part, seemed mostly oblivious, attributing the new distance to cultural eccentricities they didn't yet understand. They continued to smile, to laugh loudly, to clap each other on the back, gestures that were now universally interpreted as threat displays, dominance assertions, and practice blows. Xyler was a changed being. He secluded himself in his pod, refusing to attend classes. The Vexian concept of honor was tied to one's place in the predatory hierarchy. He had been publicly, utterly demoted. He had not just been out-hunted. He had been reduced to the status of prey, his every instinctual tool turned against him. When he finally emerged, his arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful paranoia. He moved with a new kind of stealth, not the confident glide of a hunter, but the furtive skittering of something that knows it is being watched. Lyra, conversely, found a strange new strength in her fear. Now that she understood it, she could manage it. It was no longer a debilitating panic, but a tool, just as Xyler had once claimed, a tool for awareness. She began to study the humans, not with terror, but with the cautious respect one would afford a sleeping voral cat. She watched them in the refectory, noting how their eyes would track movement across the room, how they would instinctively position themselves with their backs to a wall, how they worked together in their social groups. Their packs. With an effortless, non-verbal coordination, she learned to read their faces. The baring of teeth, the smile, was a de-escalation signal, she realized. It was a way for a predator to show it was not currently in a state of aggression. See, my weapons are visible, but I am not using them. It was a gesture that could only evolve in a creature so confident in its abilities that it needed a way to signal non-intent. One afternoon, stealing her nerves, Lyra decided she needed to understand more. She found Ava Reyes sitting alone in one of the Arboretum domes, sketching the alien flora in a physical notebook. This dome was a replica of a Zalosian moon garden, filled with gently chiming crystal trees. The air was cool and still. Ava looked up as Lyra approached, and she offered a small, tentative smile. It was a different smile from the one in the arena, softer, more cautious. Perhaps the humans were beginning to notice the change in the air around them. "Hi, Lyra, right?" Ava asked. Lyra gave a slight bow, a gesture of respect on Cathar. "That is correct. May I ask you a question, Ava Reyes?" "Sure." And just Ava is fine. Lyra's 3 hearts were beating steadily, a rhythm she consciously controlled. "The Nexus match, your strategy, it was unfamiliar." Ava's gaze drifted to the crystal trees. "Oh, yeah, sorry about that. I think I was a little hard on your friend Xyler." "He is not my friend," Lyra said quietly. "But my question is not about him, it is about you. The method you used, the relentless pursuit. Is that something you were taught?" Ava seemed to consider this for a moment. "Taught? I don't know, I guess. I mean, I've run a few marathons back on Earth. 6 of them, actually. You learn a lot about pacing and endurance. When the simulation started, and he went into full stealth mode in that swamp, I knew I couldn't beat him at his own game. Vexians are master ambushers, so I decided not to play his game. I decided to make him play mine." Lyra processed this. Marathons. She accessed the term on her datapad, a race, on foot, for a distance of over 42 kilometers, for sport. They ran down their prey for survival, and when survival was assured, they continued to do it for fun. The concept was so profoundly alien, so deeply predatory, that Lyra felt a fresh wave of awe and terror. "Why?" Lyra asked, the question coming out as a faint chirp. "Why would you do that? Run so far?" Ava shrugged, a gesture Lyra now understood as a self-deprecating display of relaxing the major shoulder muscles used in powerful throwing motions. "It's hard to explain. There's a point you reach around mile 20, they call it the wall. Your body is screaming at you to stop. Every instinct says you're dying. But if you push through it, there's something on the other side, a kind of quiet, a clarity. You feel like you could just run forever." Lyra stared at her. In that moment, she understood everything. That quiet clarity Ava was describing, it was the mind of the persistence hunter, the state of pure focus achieved when the body becomes a perfect, indefatigable engine of pursuit. Humans didn't just have a predator's body, they had a predator's mind. They had found a way to tap into their deepest, most ancient instinct and turn it into a source of spiritual and physical fulfillment. "I see," Lyra said, and for the first time she truly did. "Thank you for the explanation, Ava." She bowed again and retreated, leaving the human to her sketching. She walked back through the corridors of the Academy, the various species of the galaxy parting before her. The universe felt different now, larger and more dangerous. The Cathar had spent millennia developing their civilization based on principles of community, harmony, and evasion. They had thought this was the path to enlightenment, but they had been learning from a textbook written by prey. The humans were a living lesson from a different book entirely. They were living proof that one species could rise from the bottom of the food chain to the top, not by growing the sharpest claws, but by cultivating the most relentless will. They were friendly, they were kind, they were compassionate. But beneath the soft skin and the easy smiles was a core of evolutionary iron, forged in a world of terror they had not fled from but had conquered. The fear would never truly go away. Lyra knew that now. It was part of her, a biological truth, but it was no longer a weakness. It was a reminder that the galaxy was not a safe, predictable place. A reminder that even in the most civilized of settings, the echoes of the ancient savanna could still be heard. And a reminder that while she and her kind had evolved to listen for the footfalls of the predator in the grass, humanity had evolved to become the silence that followed, the patient, endless chase that had no need to roar.